Hello YouTube, this is Neon, and today I'm going to be talking about white privilege. This is an opinion piece on white privilege. So, first of all, I'm going to start off by saying that my focus is going to be, this is not going to be my focus, but this is how I'm going to start off this talk. There are many whites out there who admit to white privilege. White men and women who admit that there is in fact such a thing as white privilege. They admit that it is unfair, unjust, unmerited, immoral, unearned. They regret it, they're ashamed of it, and they see it as something that certainly economically continues to oppress people of color. These whites I refer to as freedom fighters, and you can find them online, whether they're at Black Lives Matters protests or other similar protests, and they're out there arguing against whites who try to argue against people of color fighting for equal rights, and they argue on behalf, particularly when whites try to say that there is no white privilege or that African Americans somehow have it easier. These whites stand up and say, no, actually we have it easier and it's unfair and it's sick. Bill O'Reilly. When I was a Republican, I kind of liked Bill O'Reilly. I was a self-hating gay, so I kind of liked him as well. I'm part of that, motivated by that, I suppose. I was anti-abortion, and I've changed on all those issues. But I have not seen Bill O'Reilly's show for a long time. He ain't on the air no more. He ain't on Fox no more. But he had a show on that included a piece on white privilege. And apparently he got very indignant at the very notion of it. What do I mean by privilege? I'm going to refer to my privilege. I have male privilege. I've seen men who they don't really like to acknowledge the presence of women. They do not want to work for a woman. That may be the only time they really talk to a woman on par is when they have a woman boss. I've seen them, they won't pay eye contact with a woman. They won't even turn to look at her. Everything about them communicates that you are not my equal and you are not worthy to talk to. When I talk to them, they'll look at me and they will treat me as someone at least deserving to be talked to. And this includes many white men who really don't value people of color, but they will talk to an African American man. This includes many African American men who don't value gay people. They don't value us, and they don't even want us in their presence. I have found that many of them, at least in LA, where anti-gay bigotry and homophobia is really not tolerated, in many parts of LA you can get away with that. I have found that they will at least talk to a gay man. Some of these men won't really talk to a woman unless there's something sexual as part of their motivation. Okay. That's privilege. Because I'm a male, because of my genitalia, they're willing to talk to me as someone that they can have a conversation with. Because I live in the US, the wealthiest nation on earth, one of the largest fully industrialized nations on the earth, I can count on potable drinking water. I'm fortunate that social services pays for SSI because I have mental illness and I am not stable enough to work, and I cannot work and be around people and take care of myself. And I've gone back to work many times, and I've always had relapses being around people with my mental illness. And so they've reinstated it. several times my SSI. I can count on that. I can count on a roof over my head. Unfortunately, not everybody in the U.S. can. These are privileges that I have not earned, I don't deserve, they're unmerited, they're unfair. They're immoral in the sense that a country this rich should be taking care of its people. But they're immoral in the sense that in third world countries, torn by war, and then complicated by drought, where people could function, but war and a lot of the social and civil unrest makes it to where, or many other reasons, makes it where people don't have access to potable drinking water. Where people may die on the street, where people don't have a lot of the privileges that I have. Privilege is something that we don't earn. Privilege is something that we can take for granted. And so with white privilege, I consider it to be the worst. I really do. I was working as a volunteer, complete volunteer, and I was in charge of taking in a food shipment that this particular LGBT, very friendly church would run in order to give food to people who really needed the help. And I was in charge of taking in that shipment and storing that food. We would get 2 to sometimes 3 big pallets full of food, and we had 3 different areas that they were stored. I became in charge of that for several months, and I was in charge of the volunteers. We had a white transgender woman, okay, male to female, who one day came in. Most of the volunteers that worked for me were Latino, and we got along and it was wonderful. When she came in, and I'm not saying she did this because she was white, but she was bossing me around, and I thought, this is okay, I can deal with this, because most of the Latinos that came in would boss me around. And as a new person in charge, I wanted to try different things, and I didn't want them to feel, and I did not want to be the person dictating to volunteers who I love and value. So I didn't mind being bossed around and trying to do things in different ways, and then learning the best way. What really bothered me with her though was that the volunteers that were volunteering under me had told me, you know, she was bossing around everyone like she was in charge, and this was the first time she came to help with storing this food. At that point I became very angry, because I didn't really tolerate volunteers trying to boss other volunteers around. Really, that was my position, to boss people around. And I did that as little as possible. The volunteers were wonderful. There really wasn't much need to boss anybody around. But she was bossing everybody around. Now that may be the idea of white privilege. You have a white transgender woman who came amongst people of color. We were all men. I'm African American, mixed, and all the volunteers were Latinos. She may, out of white privilege, have assumed that she was going to be in charge of everybody, and she was going to boss everybody around. We certainly know that that's what she did. Was that white privilege? She would probably say no. Now, I was determined to get revenge on her, and I did. She posted an ad of a woman that she said, this was a cisgender white woman, who complained about how hard she had it in school. She said, my parents had money, but you know, I was a nerd and I was really good at chess, and I would compete against the boys and usually beat them, and I really didn't understand fashion, and I couldn't hold a conversation with the cool kids, and I was kind of rejected by the cool kids, and it was really bad, and I kind of dressed like a nerd too. And so I thought, this is my chance to get even. I said, wow, in this video that you promoted and say that you relate to so much, this video isn't about anybody who suffered. This video is more about a white person bragging about their privileged life. I said, until you've seen someone beaten until they piss their pants, until you've seen someone shot in front of you, you shouldn't complain about how hard you had it. So she became indignant. Her dad jumped in on Facebook and told me off. And I just, whatever, I left it alone. I'm like, she probably didn't know I was getting back at her for what she had done to the volunteers, but I was, and I did. I've been in foster homes. Most kids in foster homes have experienced any combination of psychological abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, physical abuse, emotional, regardless of the race. But in my view, because of white privilege, I've heard of more stories of whites who have been able to get and gain financial stability versus people of color who have been in the foster care system. Once they get out of the system, if they join the military or if they manage to get an education, it's very uncommon for foster people who grew up in foster homes or spent time in foster homes to get an education. But if they do, they're probably going to be able to get work. They're not going to be actively discriminated against. They have the privilege that if they're qualified for a job, they'll get an interview and they'll have a good chance of getting the job. Doesn't matter their past. Doesn't matter how hard they grew up. African Americans, we're going to have to contend with that, whether we had a good life or a bad life. If we had a bad life, we now have to try to get an education, and we now have to try to contend with hiring discrimination, which, to my understanding, it is ubiquitous in the private sector. Private sector, many companies, they do not hire African Americans, and they will not hire African Americans in positions that can lead to executive positions. That is what I mean by white privilege. The assumption, and very justifiably so, that they have a chance at getting a decent paying job just based on their education and qualifications. Whereas African Americans who are fully qualified, they can't assume that. That is white privilege. I remember on set, an African American who was in charge of props, he had given, I was playing a bailiff, and in this particular scene, even though I was being paid non-union minimum wage, we had to walk he was a guest star on this particular show. So the prop guy needed to talk to us. There was a white security guard and there was myself. And I forget what instructions he had to give us, but he talked to me directly more than he talked to the white person. And I was actually less experienced than the white person. He had a little more experience with, I don't know, with guns and whatever. And I remember I thanked this particular African American prop guy, because I told him a lot of times even African American members on set, when they talk to a group of extras, they will talk to the white person. And they sort of automatically assume that they're going to be in charge. And I said, you actually talk to me more than you talk to him. And I actually know a little less than him, but I appreciate that. And he said, oh yeah, cool, I get you. That's another example of white privilege. Paul Mooney talks about African Americans that mistreat other African Americans as black Anglo-Saxons, meaning they have a mentality of the majority persuasion, which is that we're not equal, we're not high earners, we don't have the potential to earn high money. I've been mistreated by security guards, African American and Latino security guards, who have followed me around in stores. I haven't stolen anything from any store since I was a teenager. And when I did then, it was like candy bars and sunflower seeds. That's something I've had to contend with, where even security guards of color will follow me around, and they won't do it to whites. I remember one time my boyfriend intimidated a really large security guard who was following me. I was so nervous I could barely even look at things, as he was standing at the aisle and just hawk-eyeing me. And my boyfriend came, he was, I don't know, waiting in the car or something, and he came in and saw this big old security guard, and my boyfriend had an evil eye he could give, and the security guard just walked away. He said, I can't believe this security guard was doing that. It's like he was stalking you. Most whites don't have to worry about that. That is white privilege. I do believe it exists, and I believe whites should admit to it and try to straighten things out rather than deny it. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share, comment commercials, recommend my videos. Do one or more of those things. Thank you. Best wishes.